At first this guy was just an annoyance, but now I think it's time to destroy him. This libertarian realist has been leaving comments on the 350 video for the Rerum Notora. This is what he's saying.
What I said is that you lied, and now you have revealed yourself for all of YouTube to see as a liar, and in so doing, you have destroyed yourself. You know, you could have extricated yourself from this whole situation, and you could have proven me wrong when I called you a liar. You could have said, okay, I made a mistake, I misspoke. 3 minutes into a video in which I tried to describe the major phenotypical differences among the major populations of human beings, when I said that that's it, this is all the characteristics you can find to distinguish human populations, human races, that I misspoke. I didn't really mean that literally. It's just something that happens when you're doing videos on the fly. So I would have said, okay, perfectly understandable. You didn't literally mean that to be true. I showed and I cited exactly the kind of evidence you demanded from a couple of scholars who published in a scholarly journal an article showing that there are more differences in bone structure than you identified.
They found blacks tend to have longer limbs with smaller circumferences, meaning that their centers of gravity are higher compared to whites of the same height. Asians and whites tend to have longer torsos, so their centers of gravity are lower. Libertarian realist, tell me something I don't already fucking know.
Well, I told you something that you didn't state in your video. 3 minutes into it, you said, that is all there is classifying different groups of people, after going over a cursory analysis of a few bones. Well, that was not all there was classifying different groups of people. I brought up merely one additional example. That one additional example was sufficient to show your statement to be incorrect and to show you to be a liar.
Where is the line? I keep asking people to show me where's the line of another species. Because that's what's being claimed right now.
Claimed by who? Claimed not by me, nor by any race realists of whom I am aware who have existed throughout history. Nobody has ever claimed, as far as I know, that blacks and whites are different species. Do you not understand the difference between a species and a race? How could anybody who has read a Biology 101 ninth grade textbook believe that race is the same category as species?
We can't divorce the IQ test from culture or environmental influence. Desperate people do desperate things. It doesn't matter if they're black or white. If you give nobody a stint in the culture, if you convince them constantly that they are inherently inferior, how do you think they're going to act?
Well, I agree that there are cultural issues, and it is a problem that whites are constantly told that they are morally inferior to blacks, and that they are saddled with unearned guilt, and that they must redeem themselves, and that all through school they are taught that white people throughout history committed horrible acts, and they are told that black people, by contrast, are heroes. They celebrate Black History Month. There's no White History Month. And we can tell by the way that students respond to the question of who are the most important figures in American history, and they will name people like Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, before they will mention names such as Thomas Edison, Benjamin Franklin. When students are applying for college, it is made quite clear to them that blacks are more highly valued than whites. They are given special consideration under affirmative action, special scholarships, and special incentives. In spite of these cultural biases, whites still outperform blacks on standardized tests by a wide margin. Now, if you want to claim the contrary position, that you can infer some kind of implicit bias from the results of the standardized test scores, then you would have to believe that the tests are rigged in favor not of whites, but of Asians, because Asians still outperform whites on average on such standardized tests.
And this so-called default position purely from logic, what default position purely from logic? We have just been offering over and over again the evidence that proves you're wrong. And because you don't want to talk about the fact that you have no evidence, you keep going to this, observation that variation exists.
Yeah, see, the observation that there is variation that is very consistently ordered according to racial groups, variation in things that are controlled by the brain, such as performance on intelligence tests, such as behavior, which includes the commission of violent crimes. You conclude from that there is zero variation among the racial groups inside the head. I conclude that there is. You claim that you've proven me wrong. You have provided no evidence that I am wrong. Observations continue to confirm my premise. Observations and study after study of measures of intelligence and crime all around the world continue to render your assumption of innate equality completely irrelevant as a predictor of actual observable outcomes.
If I was walking down the street and I saw a guy from Jamaica with his hair dreadlocked, does that make him a different species?
If I was walking into a debate and my opponent kept referring to straw men, does that make him a good debater?
And against all odds, absolutely 100% of equals among the three races. He basically is saying that there's definite differences in the races and they're not equal. But he has no proof to back himself up.
No, see, I was asking you for proof of your assertion that there is absolute innate equality among all human populations. Now, see, when humans observe patterns of differences across time and across cultures, and those differences are persistent, and not only that, but that those differences can be linked to actual biological sources that would logically seem to produce those differences, such as brain size, which just happens to correlate positively with the differences that we observe in IQ. The odds are so monumentally stacked against the idea of innate equality. You would have to assume that all of our observations and all of the biological differences that we can tie to those observations are all just a big coincidence. The probability of that is so minuscule that the only way that you could intelligibly object to the idea of a link between observed outcomes and innate abilities is by just engaging in some philosophical debate about the nature of induction or something like that, in which case, you would throw out most all scientific generalizations.
This isn't a matter of evidence. This is a matter of your belief. You're a religious fanatic. You just don't believe in God. You're just like an antinatalist. You are convinced of the rightness of your position, so you go out in search of information that confirms your belief.
There's something in psychology called projection, in which an individual projects his emotions, his prejudices, his failings onto somebody else. And I think that's what's going on here. Because clearly you are very emotional about this issue, and clearly you are driven by a desire to defeat arguments that would advance what you describe as racism. That's clearly your motivation. Now, in order to ascribe ideology to the conclusions I draw about racial differences, you would have to suppose that I have an ideological drive to see Asians become more intelligent than whites, to see Asians end up being less prone to criminal behavior on average than whites, because those are the conclusions that I draw from the evidence presented. That's just what the evidence happens to show. Now, I don't think the evidence that Asians on average score better on intelligence tests suggests that Asians are more likely to produce geniuses, because it is possible for whites, even with slightly lower average IQs, to have a wider variation in their intelligence and more extremes on either end of the bell curve. And that 1% on the far right end of the bell curve, from which creative geniuses emerge, could be more important in terms of the advancement of civilization than the raw averages.
Mental functioning sex drive. Now we're back to the sex drive. The hyper-aggressive black guy who wants to rape all the white women. Oh, Jesus Christ. Have we really not come that far in 60 years? I know it's only 60 years ago, but Jesus Christ.
Now, race realism does not refer to any specific conclusions that one would draw from racial differences. It refers to being bound by the conclusions that the evidence presents. And race realists can disagree on a lot of things and still be race realists. It's about interpreting the evidence. By contrast, racial egalitarians are dogmatists. They are fixed on one single position. None of the race egalitarians I have come across have deviated one iota from a standard, fixed, set-in-stone, absolute, unshakable position of innate racial equality. Whether they are race deniers, race equalitarians, race minimizers, race superficialists, whatever their rationale, they all go back to this absolute dogma of innate racial equality, and they absolutely refuse to believe that there is anything innate that can account for any fraction of the observed disparities among racial groups that we see. So, if you want to accuse me of being bound by ideology while absolving yourself from being bound by ideology, even though you have provided no evidence for your position, and all your justifications for your position seems to be rooted in your emotional commitment to your ideology, you really need to take a good hard look in the mirror and project what you're saying about me right back at yourself.
We can't help it that you're some sort of white trash numbskull somewhere who doesn't know how to get anything done. That's not our problem. That's not an Inuit's problem, and that's certainly not a sub-Saharan African's problem. That is your problem. For being a libertarian, you sure are a pussy, and you sure as hell don't do anything. So get your head out of your ass.
Now see, I could never get away with something like this, because I hold a dissident view on matters of race. If I were to engage in name-calling, in stereotyping, in prejudice, in just a blatant personal attack as a substitute for a substantive argument, I would be called out on that, and I would be branded a bigot and a hater, and I would be completely discredited. But because you hold widely accepted establishment views on race, you can get away with it, and people will just cheer you for being so emotionally invested in this issue that you are completely disengaging yourself from the language of rational discourse.
And if I don't hear the next thing out of your mouth is they're different species because...
Oh, please, get real.